So this is the last Sunday of our Lenten encounters with Jesus. Next week on Palm Sunday, we're going to be entering triumphant into the city of Jerusalem, only for Jesus to quickly be betrayed, arrested, tried, killed for the crime of being a king. But he wasn't a king as the world expected him to be a king. He was a king who would school the scholars and befriend the outcast, heal the blind. He was a king who would encourage and challenge us and love us above all else. In our previous encounters with Jesus, we saw him one-on-one with Nicodemus, the scholar, with the woman at the well, who was the outcast, with the blind man begging at the temple. But today we're going to meet Jesus through his found family, his family on earth that he had gathered together, the people that he loved, and the people that loved him, Mary and Martha, all of his disciples, and despite the name of the story, only a smidgen of Lazarus. Mostly it's going to be everybody else. I'm sure you have heard this story before, probably ad nauseum over the years. Every year at church, I think we probably hear this story. But this could also possibly be your first time hearing this story. Today, we read about a great miracle, the raising of Lazarus from the dead. Now, Jesus had done so many miracles before, but this seems to be a pinnacle. He's healed the sick, he's fed the 5,000. But resurrection? Resurrection. Now, I really thought that resurrection was reserved for the cross, for Jesus. But here we see it. And that's one of the things that makes this story so powerful. It's really more than a miracle. It is a viewing of who Jesus really is. It is a foreshadowing of what's going to come in Holy Week. And this story is so chock full of human emotions. These emotions shine through, and they can really pierce our heart with this familiar ache because they are the feelings of the human experience. And they are the feelings of us. And I know that each of us has felt these emotions keenly throughout our lives. Another thing they do in this story, at least for me, is these emotions remind me that these people, though they lived 2,000 years ago, are just like us. They were in a deep place of fear and suffering, of grief and anger. And amidst all of this, we're shown that Jesus feels these things too. How special is that in this story? Especially if this is from the book of John. In the book of John, Jesus is always in control. He knows when things are going to happen. His time has not yet come. It's not time. He's so calm. And he's always telling the disciples exactly what's going to happen. Don't worry. This is going to happen. But here in this story, that stops. And there's going to be a moment in this story where he's surrounded by people who mourn. And in that moment, in the shortest verse of the Bible, we see Jesus wept. If we believe in the tenets of our faith, then we believe that Jesus in this story is fully human and fully God. If we believe in the tenets of our faith, then we see God here as he mourns for the brokenhearted and for the people that he loves. And when God breaks this calm and he shares in our humanity, he's surrounded by the most guttural emotions that we can have. And this really helps me feel so connected to God, that God felt these things too, and he understands them. So what emotions do we find in this story? Because there's a whole bunch of them, and I'm probably not even going to get to like half of them. But we're going to start with love. That's always a great place to start from. Now, Mary and Martha sent a letter to Jesus, and they told him, "He whom you love is ill." And the word here for love is philia, which is brotherly, sisterly love. When Jesus finally goes to Lazarus' tomb, the people around him cry out, "Look, see how he loved Lazarus." But here is a different form of the word love. Here we have the agape love, which is the sacrificial, the godly love. The next emotion we can find in the story is fear. After Jesus receives this message from Mary and Martha, he tells his disciples that they've got to go back to Judea, where they just recently fled for their life. And the disciples' response is, "Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? We have to go back to the place where they just tried to stone you?" The next line is one of my favorites in the story. It really makes you feel like these people could have been exactly like you. It's a little bit sarcastic if you can read between the lines a little bit. So Thomas, and this is doubting Thomas, that Thomas, "Well, let us all go then. We'll die with you." Let me read it exactly. "Well, let us also go that we may die with him." So what I love here is that Thomas's fear turns into bravery. And I just think that's so lovely. There's a lot of this switching of emotion in this story. Familial love in the beginning turns into sacrificial love at the end. The fear of the disciples ends in bravery as they face danger with their friend Jesus. But Mary and Martha's feelings are next. And I think they have a right to a lot of these feelings because it's their brother who was sick. It's their brother who they had reached out to cry for help for Jesus. And it's their brother that passed away and Jesus didn't come. And, there's all these things going on. So Jesus didn't answer this letter right away. He waited 2 days to answer their cry for help. And keep in mind that it would have been a 2-day journey to get back there. So for him, waiting 2 days was even extra long. Why did he do this? He could have left immediately. He could have healed Lazarus before he even died. And these were the people that he loved. This was his family. So why did Jesus wait? That's a question I think a lot of people have. When he finally met with Mary and Martha, they were really confused and hurt. I imagine they might have felt abandoned, angry, maybe even betrayed. It's hard for us to put emotions like that onto the people in the Bible because we kind of want to saint them. Oh, they couldn't have possibly been angry at Jesus. They couldn't have possibly felt betrayed, but I think it's a possibility. And when Jesus meets them, they all tell him the same thing. Lord, if you had only been here, my brother would not have died. And we're told in the Bible that this is for the glorification of God, but you know what? This doesn't really feel very comforting. It's because glory, from a modern perspective, means something different. It feels very personal to us. When we have glory, we've kicked the goal into the soccer net, the glory of winning. We've done something great at work. We're the glory of something we've earned or something we've done. But here, glory is much more than that. Glory is the ultimate purpose of God. This, Jesus waiting, was for the ultimate purpose of all the end of this, which was for the love that God had for us. Jesus waits to raise Lazarus because he knew that it would be the tipping point for his journey to the cross. In the beginning of this story, we're introduced to Mary, and it says in the word, the one who anointed Jesus' feet with oil and wept. But did you know that this story hasn't happened yet? It happens after this in Jerusalem, when they're all sitting around together, and they're all waiting in this fear and trepidation. We know what's going to happen. Jesus knows what's going to happen. And Mary weeps, and she honors Jesus with wiping his feet with this really expensive oil. This doesn't happen in the Lazarus story. It happens later, but it's brought to our attention first in the story of Lazarus. So we're bringing, this what's going to happen, the glorification of God is coming first in this story. Then at the end of this story, Jesus tells Lazarus to come out of the tomb. And people celebrate and they believe, but not everyone. There are some people, and this we find in verse 46, which we didn't get to. There's some people who leave for the Pharisees to tell them about what happened. And when the Pharisees learned that Jesus did this, that he raised Lazarus from the dead, it is a really big deal, to the point where they even decide that they're going to go kill Lazarus again. Can you believe that? What is going on? So Jesus knew that this would happen by him going to raise Lazarus from the dead. This was just the moment where it's like you couldn't turn around again. And after this, the story that we see in Lazarus repeats again in the Passion of the Christ. All of the fear, all of the anger and betrayal, the grief and the suffering is going to happen again. But we know that these things will turn to hope and joy. And ultimately that the love of God is going to shine through the glorification of God. So can you feel kind of what's happening in this story yet? I love all of these emotions. So familial love turns into sacrificial godly love. Fear turns into bravery. The despair of Martha and Mary turns into hope and belief when their brother comes out of the tomb. And finally, maybe the ultimate peak of this story is when Jesus, God incarnate, feels and understands the emotions that are happening here, and he joins those people in their emotions. Mary runs out to meet Jesus. She's running out to meet him to share in her grief. And she is weeping, and the people who surround them, the mourners that are sitting with them in solidarity, they are all weeping. And it's at this moment that Jesus is greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. And he says, "Where have you laid him?" I kind of like the gentleness. That feels gentle to me. Tell me, where is he? And Mary says, "Come and see. Lord, come and see. Abide with me in my grief. I have run to meet you, and I have shared my pain with you. Come and see, Lord. This is when Jesus breaks down and weeps. That makes me weepy. So what does this tell us? I think it tells us that together we help each other through the muck of this life. Together we are there for each other in the difficult times, but also that together with God, we have someone that can share in our path. God shares these things with us. He's someone to shoulder the burden, and he's someone that reminds us of the ultimate agape, the love and sacrifice of God. There's a theme that runs through the entirety of all 4 scriptures today, and we didn't get to all the scriptures. There's Ezekiel. We heard a little bit about Ezekiel at the beginning. There's Psalms, which we read through. We didn't get to Romans, and then there's John, the story of Lazarus. But I wanted to share with you this theme, because I think it's really beautiful. In Ezekiel, the people of Israel, after they've lost everything, they are filled with despair, and God shows Ezekiel a vision of restoration and hope. The dry bones come together, and they're filled with the breath of God. And he says, I have not abandoned you, Israel. And in the Psalms, David cries out to the Lord from the depths of his despair, and his soul waits for hope. More than someone who waits for the morning. That happens twice. More than someone who waits for the morning. He is trusting in the Lord's steadfast love and the power to redeem. And then in Romans, which you saw, if you saw my post this week on Facebook, it had to do with Romans. Paul reminds us to focus on the Spirit, which brings life and peace. This is the spirit of the dry bones, when God breathed upon them and sparked life. And the despair of these dry bones is David's deep heartache, and he's crying out to the Lord for hope. And then in John, when Jesus calls Lazarus out of the tomb, he says, unbind him, and the Spirit of God restores hope and life. Then Jesus reorients himself towards Jerusalem, toward the glorification and ultimate purpose of agape love. Now, you guys know I like to listen to my podcasts. Well, there's one that's my favorite, and the guy said something this week that I just couldn't get out of my head, and I think I listened to it 4 times. The quote is, the Lord is love and will restore. Where there is despair, there is also hope, because God in Christ gives us the Word and the Spirit, and it's a gift. So much so that for us to come out of our tombs, Jesus is most willing to come in. And that's what is happening in Lazarus. You know, Jesus calls Lazarus out of the tomb, knowing that he has to turn around and go towards Jerusalem. In our dark times, I think that the gift of God is that he wants to walk beside us. Now, there have been a lot of first and last today. I didn't realize this till after I wrote it. I was like, wow, that's a theme. First and last. The final first and last I'm going to talk about comes from the book of John. Now, the first line of John says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And we know theologically that this is speaking about Jesus. Jesus is represented by the Word. And Jesus left us the Spirit, our God-breathed connection to life and peace, restoration and hope, transformation and renewal. But what's the last line of John? And surely I am with you, always, to the very end of the age. So there's our first and last. Amen.